I think when I reflect back psychologically, I think I was seeking validation about how good of an entrepreneur or how smart I was based on like getting the best brand VCs out there as a way to like feel better about myself. I think it was more about what are the right investors, given the outcome, given the market, and given what I need, versus like what are the highest status, like who is the Harvard of like investors, so that I can soothe whatever insecurity I have around being a first-time founder or being like young or being an immigrant or like whatever the source of my or our insecurities. But whenever like the Harvard rejected me of VCs, it was just like, it was like a bigger ego punch than it should have or could have been because of how much weight I put into that.
Santi, bienvenido parcero a Fundadores y Empanadas. ¿Cómo estás?
Muy bien, feliz de estar aquí.
Awesome. Great to have you on board. Salud.
Salud.
So today we've got some cocorollo. This is the good stuff.
It's good.
How's it compared to the empanadas from your childhood in Cali, Colombia?
Different. It's got a sweetness to it. It's round and looks like the sun. And they were mostly beef empanadas. So, but the corn, the fried corn shell, takes me back.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
It's great.
So Santi, we met about a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
One of our fondest memories in Medellin, Colombia together was going to the Atlético Nacional football game, or for our American audience, soccer game.
Yep.
Where we didn't make it through the whole game. There was a SWAT riot and
Yeah.
lots of human drama.
The game didn't make it to the end. We stayed after to watch. The drama was more fun than the game, maybe.
True.
Yeah.
But super excited to have you on today.
Happy to be here.
And Santi is a master at fundraising, so we're very fortunate to have him give us a master class on fundraising today. So I'd love for you to go through the story of your last company at Amplify, how you went about fundraising and finally through to the sale of the company.
Yeah, sure. I think I was really clear. I wanted to build a $100 million company quickly. You know, I was in my early 20s. I was really ambitious, really impatient. And so I the only path that I saw to getting to the outcome that I wanted was, infusing meaningful enough amounts of cash where it was at risky enough points in the company where the VC venture capitalist asset class were the kind of the only ones that would be willing to underwrite that type of early, stage risk. And so Bluebridge really started as a mobile app agency. We quickly figured out that there was a repeatable B2B SaaS product that we could sell, and we got decent renewals in the tourism space and a couple others. And so I raised a seed round. I'll just give you the big overview. So for Bluebridge, I raised a seed, an A, and then sold it, and then raised Series A and a Series B for Amplify, sold it, and then I was part of the board and part of the senior leadership team right before 15.5 raised their $52 million Series C. So that's sort of my fundraising range. They've raised about 25 million or so in venture capital, like me personally. But yeah, in the very beginning, the seed round was sort of friends and family, and then wealthy, like super angels in the Indianapolis community. Indianapolis sort of cultivated a track record around B2B SaaS, specifically sort of enterprise software. And so as we were heading into similar models, I was really excited about partnering with ex-operators, not only venture capitalists who were sort of the finance sort of MBAs, but folks who had been there, done that, started from zero. And Bill Godfrey, I was really grateful that he came on. I still remember it was an angel. It was like a Indianapolis Angels sort of pitch, right? So wealthy individuals that are mostly like business owners or ex-business owners. And I got a call from him afterwards. I put my number in my email, and I think we were raising maybe $500,000 originally. Wanted $1 million, but intentionally made it smaller so that we could sort of say, we're 50% or we're over, and then open up. It's like just, a lot of investors are like cats, herding cats. They just sort of like really follow momentum. And so anyway, he calls and he was like, I'd like to, lead the round and write you a check. And I was like, how much? And I was expecting 25, 50, 100K. And he was like 250,000. And I was like, holy crap, that's like half the round. This is amazing. And he had literally started a company from zero and took it all the way to, I think, something like 90 million ARR and sold it for over 500 million to Teradata, one of Indianapolis's better success stories. He ended up, increasing his investment over time, and we're just really grateful to have had him on board, because he was our first board member. He was really a mentor to me, and I found incredible value from those board members and investors that were operators, from the VCs as well, but you definitely get a different perspective. So I think that being really careful about board construction, like who is the ideal board to add the most value to the company, where it's not accidental and it just becomes whoever gave you money, is defending their position, is really thinking what mix of investors is going to be the best composition for what the business needs, and then sort of being really clear about that with investors about what you're bringing on. But in the early days, it was just, we had a couple of tens of thousands of MRR kind of a thing. It wasn't much, a few 100,000 of ARR. And we got rejected a lot. I remember one particular rejection was the CMO of a company I really respected. And we showed him our traction, again, maybe like 500 grand in ARR, bootstrapped it. We were doing custom mobile apps to fund payroll, and I was paying myself, I think, $2,000 a month to just like pay rent basically after college. And we had sold like 5 or 7 apps, and we wanted to sell 36 app subscriptions the next year, a pretty meaningful year-over-year increase. And he was just like, listen, I believe in you, but I just don't think you can like pull this off. And that was like just really great fuel for my co-founder Adam and I that pitched him. And then we ended up coming a year later, and we had we sold the 36 app subscriptions. In fact, we sold a few more. And he was like, okay, I'm going to invest now. And he became the first, outside check. And that was pretty awesome to both use it as fuel, but then also like actually call our shot, and then make our shot, and then be like, hey, we're not just like making up stuff. Like the goals we set out there and the goals we tell you, like we're going to die trying to get them. And we got them.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Walk me through the decision of basing your company out of Indianapolis versus a traditional tech talent pool like San Francisco, LA, New York.
It's got like a sweetness to it, I don't know what that is. It's nice.
A little bit of azúcar in there.
It's like pineapple, maybe? Yeah. I don't know. It wasn't really like a super intentional choice. I went to school in Indiana, so I was kind of there. And then I started it from my dorm room, and then like I just kind of had connections. And that's where I could get warm investor introductions, and that's where I raised money, and then that's where we got employees, and that's where we got an office. It was sort of like accidental. It wasn't like where is the best place to do this, but in a lot of ways, it was really great. I think there's some truth to sort of like the big fish, small pond kind of a thing. We were able to really stand out in the Indianapolis market in terms of like attracting the best talent, in terms of attracting investment, awards, things like that. We got some really amazing like economic development, like sort of tax breaks and assistance with rent and things like that, where I don't think you get that in San Francisco because they're not, they're flush with tech companies. And so there's a lot of benefits. Also, like what you needed to be competitive to pay an engineer or a salesperson or a marketing person because of the cost of living was like, way lower. And so, we were sometimes able to have 2 engineers for the same price as like a San Francisco or LA, software engineer. So it really helped us. There's a lot of value, I think, in secondary markets like that, to really stand out and then to really attract great talent. Now, as we started to grow and now we needed experienced executives who had been there and done that, it got harder because the experienced talent base in Indianapolis is not the same as other markets. And so in terms of individual contributors, it was amazing, and sort of like lower level managers. But when it got to senior leadership, we then immediately went sort of to a more distributed remote culture solely for the reason of expanding our talent pool, solely for the reason of hiring experienced executives who, we needed at the time to help lead the company, but they just weren't enough of them in a market
Right.
in Indianapolis. Yeah.
And also from what you described before, it sounds like your early angel investors were able to lean in more from the Indianapolis community versus the San Francisco flush community of investors that just kind of write the check, but they're more hands off. For founders that are going through fundraising and considering taking investment, how big of a factor would you say a VC's ability to help with recruitment or help on the strategy side is for the decision that you make?
It so depends, on the VC for sure. And the one thing that was interesting, to go back to the earlier point, is in the early days we didn't have a great success raising money early from coastal investors. Our seed and our A were both pretty much all local Indianapolis or regional, Midwest investors. But in a way, I like that some of these are smaller. You have to sort of understand the economics of VC, and so these were $50, $100 million, $150 million funds, and so they write smaller checks, and they're not going for consumer 1000Xs. They're going for B2B SaaS 10, 20Xs, if that makes sense. And so they're taking on sort of less asynchronous risk for a slightly more sure. And so, for example, the burn profile is different typically of a fund like that. They'll just want to be more responsible with cash because they don't want you to die as much. But if you sell for $100 million, they're fine. For a coastal investor whose fund is billions, getting a 10X doesn't move the needle on the fund. They need to get 100Xs, 1000Xs to pay back the fund, and they're actually totally okay with the rest of them dying, and in fact might actively want so that they could stop going to those board meetings that aren't going anywhere, because they understand the math, the history, that 1 in 20 companies pays for the whole fund, and maybe the second and the third add a bit to it, and then the lower 90 percentile and below don't contribute much. And so we were able to raise bigger checks in coastal money for our Series B and Amplify, but that's because we had it was more growth equity, and we had a actual revenue traction then. But yeah, so anyway, I think different VCs help with different things, right? Operator VCs and the other VCs were rightly focused on the construction of the senior executive team, and they could help sometimes source talent and even help interview and help close talent. I still remember one of our board members had a private jet, and he generously volunteered the jet to go meet with a sales executive that we were hiring, which was a couple states away. And it was pretty awesome to meet him at the private airport.
Yeah,
this is the one
nice
time
perk.
I've ridden private at that time. And I got to lift off the plane. The pilot let me do that. It was pretty cool. But that was a pretty awesome, because it just said, "Why your board member is that involved that he would lend out his private jet?" And you feel like you were courted in a way, and we were able to land that executive. So that's a key way that a amazing operator board member. I think with fundraising and just getting hey, we need to raise again. Here are metrics. VCs are great at telling you, at knowing hey, this is not good enough. You're going to have some trouble raising, or hey, this is good and these are the valuations that you might expect. Or doing M&A, acquiring a company or being sold, right? VCs go through that a lot. And so I think that's where they add a lot of value, is on sort of unit economics, financial engineering, M&A. Then the operators can help a lot on senior team construction, employee problems, CEO mentorship, sort of from an operational perspective. And yeah, I think a lot of some VC firms have centers of excellence where they have consultants ready to go to help you with a go-to-market consultant and a product consultant. Some other VCs, don't have that. I always think I usually overestimated investor introductions. I don't find that when I look back upon my journey, or the journey of a lot of my CEO clients as a coach, that they're getting a ton of introductions. unless they go with like a vertically focused VC that's like they're in the healthcare space and the VC's in healthcare, and so they can make like introductions to strategic partners or vendors or things like that. That's usually the exception. But like come on, the more generic horizontal VCs, they just usually don't come into contact with whatever random niche ICP
Right.
you have, and maybe they do have a few contacts, but they'll make the intros they can in the first year, and then after that,
Right.
their network is kind of saturated a little bit.
Yep. And walk me through how you coped with investor rejection, and what advice would you give to other founders that are going through that right now?
It's hard. It really sucks, right? You put your blood, sweat, and tears into this thing, as it's like your baby, and then they're like rejecting your baby, and you're like, how dare you, So it was hard, and I think I met with, I don't know, like 50 VCs probably, or 50 investors for every round, maybe more, and you end up getting, I don't know, 5, 7, 10 investors, and so it's mostly just rejections. I think it's keeping in mind you only need 3 lead investor yeses for 3 term sheets to negotiate, against. And then you only need 1, lead VC. And after you get the lead VC, that's usually 80% of the work, is getting the lead VC, because then that lead VC will have other investors that typically follow on. They can help with a syndicate. And just the validation that you got a legitimate, credible lead VC usually helps all the other sort of smaller checks follow. But I mean, the honest reality is, like, I probably cried. I probably like went to the gym and like slammed some weights. I was like in my early 20s. I think I have more tools now in terms of like how I might deal with that. I think one thing that I've heard about, and I've had a couple people try it, is an investor gratitude journal. Of after every investor call, writing what you learned and what you're grateful for from that investor, and really seeking a rejection with an honest reason as like a gift, because you just found out something about your business, or about, maybe it has nothing to do with your business, maybe it's you found out how an investor, this type of investor, views your company. And sometimes it's team, which hurts more, because it's like me and my people. Sometimes it's the market, and so that's a little easier, maybe. Sometimes it's the solution. Sometimes it's the founder mission, fit. Sometimes it's everything's great, but just the financials and the traction aren't there. And so it sort of hurts differently depending on the rejection reason. But flipping it into like, what's the gift here and how do I learn from that, has been great. I think another thing that was helpful that I've seen in a lot of best practice processes for fundraising is tiering out your investors into tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and then like friends and coaches, and then you start with the tier 4 folks, or the friend, the coach, and the advisor, the spouse, and you pitch it to them, and you ask for honest feedback, and then you go to your tier 3s, and then you get told a bunch of no's, but then you learn from that, and then you make the pitch better, you improve, you take another few months to improve the financials, whatever, and then you go to tier 2, and by the time you get to tier 1, you're really like humming on all cylinders. You've got the pitch down, you're rocking and rolling, you've got some momentum around confidence, and you're not doing expensive learning with the tier 1s that you really kind of want to land. But it hurts. I mean, I remember specific places where I was sitting at, where I like saw like an investor rejection email that I had my hopes around. I remember flying to Boston for OpenView, and they just used to do such a great job with like their content, and they were like my dream investor. I put a little bit too much weight into like tier 1, and I think when I reflect back psychologically, I think I was seeking validation about how good of an entrepreneur or how smart I was, based on like getting like the best brand VCs out there as a way to like feel better about myself. Because I think it was more about what are the right investors, given the outcome, given the market, and given what I need, versus like what are the highest status, like who is the Harvard of like investors, so that I can soothe whatever insecurity I have around being a first-time founder, or being like young, or being an immigrant, or like whatever the source of my or our insecurities. And so I wish I had like put a little bit less emphasis on that. But whenever like the Harvard rejected me of VCs, it was just like it was like a bigger ego punch than it should have or could have been because of how much weight I put into that. And looking back on that, I don't feel like I need that anymore, so I wouldn't have, you know what I mean? So that was like more about the phase of life that I was in, and some therapy work I hadn't done in myself yet that created that circumstance.
I totally empathize with that, and I've spent countless hours kind of ruminating over what could have been gone differently with that pitch, or kind of envisioning them being on board. So, totally get where you're coming from.
I mean, there's even that around like fundraising, like being a founder who's raised has this not weird, but it's understandable badge of honor compared with those who haven't raised and haven't been somebody who's raised and raised a lot and raised early and dealt with, investor pressure and at times underperforming on investor expectations and some of what my lack of strength around not following different investor opinions. I think it's like equally as badass to like bootstrap your business and grow slower and retain optionality, because once you jump into the VC river, it's hard to find the shore and go cash flow positive, and it's just much harder, and you're making usually a somewhat irreversible choice toward a pace of growth, a level of usually lack of profitability, and a level of performance pressure that needs to be up and to the right. It's like a mini version of a public company where there's this continuous expectation of growth and growth and growth and growth. And sometimes I've found that businesses go through natural growth spurts and then slowdowns. And that's like not as okay in VC land. You just need to spend more money to push through that. And sometimes it's an unnatural pace for the business. And so, I don't know. In a lot of ways, I think it's even more admirable to choose a bootstrap path. And at the same time, if you really like want to go big and you have venture-backed competitors in a short window of time and you truly have a scalable solution that can dominate the market, then, maybe that's the right path.
VC still makes sense in those cases, but I feel like we're also evolving just as a tech community from the 2021 days where it was grow no matter what, and exactly to your point, doing things that are unhealthy for the company for short-term gains.
Yep.
Do you have any stories of doing a lot of pushback with your board or investors around unhealthy growth tactics and the rate of return that they were trying to look with their investments?
Yeah, all the folks on the board were professional and kind to the extent that one can be. At the same time, reminding us that like we have a next round, and if we don't make the metrics for the next round, it's not pretty, right? You got to fire people. There's anti-dilution things of a down round. There's just running out of cash and the company going bankrupt. There's real consequences to it, and so I think I put more pressure on myself than my board did, but it's because I knew what the expectations of the next round of investors were. And so there were a couple of minority investors that were a little bit of a pain, that were maybe kind of rude or wrote a tiny check and are just like wanting to talk like all the time, and you're like, I gotta add value to the company. I don't have time to constantly update you on where we're at. We've sent quarterly investor updates and all that, but there was it was super stressful to like have to grow or triple or fire 30% of your friends, not friends, but people that you grow close with and you and all that, and there's a lot of pressure. I sometimes remembered like it was such a stressful process to do the fundraise, many times a 6-9 month process, and you'd get to the end as a CEO, as a lead fundraiser, and you'd be exhausted, and you realize that you didn't summit the mountain, you just arrived in base camp and purchased like the equipment that you needed. And now you're exhausted, and now you got to go spend the money and actually deliver the growth, which is sort of like more real and harder than the fundraise bit. And so I think that's like a really is arriving totally ragged and exhausted at the end of a fundraising journey. You sort of do this like, yes, and then you're just kind of like, I accomplished something meaningful because this is real validation. We have real cash in the bank. And at the same time, the time is ticking to spend this money wisely, efficiently, but also quickly. And the more that I just raise, the higher the expectation of the exit is. And the lower the minimum exit is for founders and employees to make money. Because there is a exit. When you raise money, there are several exit scenarios in which investors, preferred shares, make money and common doesn't. And that, I think, is like the worst fear of a founder, is that you built something of value and investors walk away with money and you and your co-founders and your employees don't. And that's like that's the heartbreaking reality, and it happens more often than we think because of this sort of preferred common share, accrued dividend, sort of two-class structure that most of us are, forced to raise in, which I think is fundamentally kind of unfair on the entrepreneur side. And you started to see in the sort of peaks of the low interest rate phenomenon market, like founders selling common shares to investors and just having a single sort of aligned, but then, that stopped, and basically no one is able to pull that off now unless you're like Facebook or something like that, back, 20 years ago or whatever.
Yeah. For our first-time founder listeners, what are some major red flags that you would look out for in term sheets or predatory practices that you've come across?
Yeah. So Venture Deals is a great book. It's by Brad Feld, I believe. And it's like a way to spend 4 to 6 hours and get smart enough about all the term sheet terms to not totally get rocked by. It's a fundamentally like the power dynamic is wild because they've done 100 to 200, whatever, hundreds of these deals. You're doing your first one as a first-time founder. It can be an extremely vulnerable position in terms of how it feels and actually like what it is, because you don't know what you don't know. And so I think, like participating like preferred structures, I'm like 90% sure that's the term. It's been a bit since I've raised money. But that basically like investors get their money back like plus interest first, and then they get an equal share of whatever is left. It's like double dipping essentially. So it's kind of like you either it's a bad outcome and investors get 1x or 1x plus like interest rates, or it's a good outcome and you just get, if you have 10%, you as an investor you get 10% out. More than a 1x liquidation preference. Accrued dividends is tough. Like you get equity, a share of the company ownership, and then that share grows by 6 or 8% every year you're in business. That doesn't sound like a lot, but that ends up like you fast forward 10 years, which many of these journeys take 7, 8, 10, 12, 13, sometimes longer. That ends up being really meaningful in terms of those like accruing dividends actually, converting over into even more equity than what they originally purchased. I think something that's also really helpful is getting like a CFO type, like a fractional CFO type, to put together like a real detailed exit analysis of, if you accept these terms, here's like math-wise how it's going to go based on a few different scenarios. That can really help you understand the true dilution, because sometimes you think, oh, I'm selling this % of the company, but then you have one down round or you wait 10 years to exit or whatever, and all of a sudden it's like, no, they actually own a lot more. And then that's a really tough realization as a founder when you get surprised by an extra 10, 20 points of dilution, along the way. That's heartbreaking. A really great attorney that's experienced in M&A, can be really helpful. Reading Venture Deals, talking to other founders, having multiple term sheet options to see, to negotiate, against others. Even things like structures like a safe note, there's still ways you should negotiate that and not just take like this is like industry standard, says the self-interested VC who wants you to accept those terms,
right.
That were created by like a venture capital association, and so I think first-time founders are just too accepting of like, well, that's just the way it is, or that's how it's done, or they're telling me that this is normal, versus like, no, there's no rules. Like you if an investor is interested enough in you and it's a competitive enough process, you can negotiate a lot of things. Mark Zuckerberg still has shares that have like voting rights that are like multiples of other share classes because, and that was Facebook, and they were highly in demand and pretty incredible, performance at the time, but still, not just accepting what you've been given and really, I remember printing these contracts out and reading every line and highlighting it and having like 30 questions to my lawyer. And I think that's like the level of like mind numbing like engagement with this that it takes to really not be surprised later. But this idea of just like sending it to your lawyer says it's fine and it's industry standard, usually you leave stuff on the table or you get surprised later on by some little provisions that end up mattering quite a bit.
Yep.
Lastly, I think I just touched on a lot of economic terms, and I think there's Venture Deals talks about there's two types of things that you negotiate in a term sheet. Economic terms and control terms, right? Economic is the money you make. Control terms many times end up being more important, like vetoing a sale of the company, a single investor having veto of like a next fundraising and just being like, we're going to block your next fundraising, which like happens all the time. Here are our terms and we're not going to, like, what? Like, and they can do that. Or needing to approve venture debt, which is sometimes like decreases the need for the company to get more VC dollars, but it may be like a lower cost of capital choice for the company. So there's like a conflict of interest and the investor can like block that. And you just assume like, don't they have a fiduciary responsibility to do what's right for the company? And it's like, I don't know, like, yes, they do, and I had fairly honest VCs, and at the same time, if you were to really ask me, like, the priorities of the VC are their LPs, and secondarily, their portfolio companies, and that's just the truth. They need to raise another LP round. They need to deliver returns, and the company is the vehicle and the canvas by which to do so. And so, I think being really clear about that. That's who they are, and the best VCs were like just really transparent about who they were and what their motivations were, and that was at least helpful because then they weren't pretending to be like,
we're founder first.
Yeah, exactly. Your best friend, and at the end of the day, you get really surprised by something that happens, and it's just like they're professionals who have a job, and their primary job is to return great returns to their LPs, and then they have a secondary job of adding value to companies and doing the right thing for founders so that they can have a good enough brand to invest in the next one.
Yep.
This is generalizations, of course. There are exceptions, to this rule, but I think you got to go in pretty clear-eyed about what this all is.
And when you're going through fundraising, how did you strike a balance between being honest about the challenges of your company, but also staying optimistic about the outlook and the future of the company?
It's like staging a house to sell it for real estate. You sort of want to like bring in great looking furniture to stage it, and you're not lying about but you're very much showing the very best version, right? It's you're putting on makeup, you're putting on your best outfit, whatever. Like you're just and every other founder is sharing metrics that are like the most stretching, ambitious, bullish version of their projections, and then they have like a realistic and like a pessimistic other version, but everyone's sharing like the happy path, best case scenario. So I think it's important to know who you're being benchmarked against, which is other entrepreneurs showing their very best. And And of course, you want to be honest about where you're at, and the metrics will give it enough due diligence and give enough business acumen on the other side, and given enough metrics in a late stage enough, like a Series A or Series B, where there's enough metrics, those problems will eventually, show in the numbers. And so in a lot of ways, it's getting like almost ahead of it and being like, here are our strengths, here are a couple of the areas where we're weak, and here's exactly what we're doing to make those better, and here's the expected improvement that we expect in a short amount of time. And so you're never revealing, like, you're never surprising, they're never finding that out themselves, because that's not a good dynamic. But you're also, through that tier 4, tier 3, tier 2 sort of testing structure, it's like in sales, you sort of get ahead of the objection. You don't wait for the objection to come up. You just sort of make it a core part of your pitch deck early on. Yep. And then you're really clear on exactly what you're doing to improve that, or judo flip whatever is going on there.
Yep. And there's a lot of parallels between raising a round of funding and also the sale of a company that you've gone through multiple times. Walk me through both the strategy side of how you've gone through the sales, and also the emotional side of dealing with burnout and pushing through.
Yeah, a lot of parallels in that it's intense from the founder sort of journey, but they're both exciting validation steps. They both immensely distract you from day-to-day operations and growth of the business. I mean, I remember the first 2 fundraisers, I just thought, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing, CEO and operations-wise, and I'll just stay late and get less sleep, And then after the first 2, I was like, no, like before I started fundraising, I was like, I laid out everything that I was doing, and I cut half of it, and I delegated it to my team. And I was like, I can't do these things anymore. Like, we need to have a conversation about who's doing this, because getting to complete crispy burnout exhaustion by the end of this, and like having home, family, or health issues, that are like, some of that may still happen, but you're realizing that when you're fundraising, you're selling the business, you now have your number 1, your number 2, and your number 3 priority is fundraising, is selling the company. And number 4 and number 5 is going to be operations, and the company needs a full-time operations leader. And so I think being really honest about, I remember like getting meal delivery service. Like I changed my whole life basically to just be like, I'm adding 6 hours a day of a different thing. Like, I can't cook food anymore myself. I need to like do home workouts because I don't have time to like go to the gym like for these 6 months. I need to like double the frequency of like the housekeeper that comes, because like, you know what I mean? Like all this like life optimization to just be ready for this, I'm training for a triathlon kind of a thing, and you just can't ignore, that. So anyway, these are things where the whole company is counting on you, and you have a heavy load on your shoulders as a founder, to do that. It doesn't have to be that way, but it comes with a territory of like caring deeply about what one is doing, and a process that is filled with potholes. I think something that's little things that are really helpful is scheduling like little breaks throughout the day, not having like 4 investor pitches or M&A things, but just having like quick little like meditation breaks, standing, walking, eating, like just reading, like little nervous system resets, so that we don't get to like a level of like depletion of our sort of emotion, psychology, energy, whatever it is. I think that's one thing that's helpful. I think another thing that's like really common another pattern is running a process that is super intentional so that you get to multiple offers at the same time. And that's where negotiating leverage comes from. And if you just have one term sheet or one sale offer, it's like really hard to have the guts to really meaningfully negotiate, right, when your other option is cashing out or recommitting another 3, 5, 10 years, to it before the next, acquisition comes. But yeah, I think when I look back, like some of the hardest times in my entrepreneurial journey were the distinct periods in which the 6-month bits where I was fundraising or selling the company.
Yep.
And those are the times where you need to be kind of, at your best and really selling and living out the vision of the company.
Yep. And I'd love to hear your story at your last company with burnout. At what point did you feel it? How did you confront it? Walk me through kind of lessons learned from dealing with burnout.
Yeah. It felt like it took less. The way I can describe it, the burnout is it would take less and less of an input of stimuli to like trigger my nervous system and be in a state of like kind of like fight or flight. And I found it harder and harder to slow down and take a break. Like I just couldn't, like even on a weekend where I was like, I don't, this is my like one day I don't work, because I used to do 5 days a week, then take off Saturday and then do like a half day on Sunday to like get ready for the week in my sort of full grind entrepreneurial season. And even on a Saturday, like the momentum of work thoughts and worries just like couldn't stop, so that there was no break away from it. And while I thought that was cool at the time, because I was just always working on my business and like giving it a few more reps, solving whatever problem while I'm sleeping, it's not actually like healthy. And I think I was young and I just didn't understand my limits, that I had limits. I thought I was just like invincible and was never going to hit a wall. And then I think that inability to like truly rest, to truly like reset my nervous system and to actually slow down and to step away from the business, I think a lot of that contributed to it. I think another piece is I've heard that burnout is when you put a tremendous amount of energy and effort into something, and when you're winning, like it's kind of like a lot of work is addictive, and so it's like, oh, it's almost fun and you don't mind the work. But when you're like putting blood, sweat, and tears into it and the thing isn't growing or it's stalling out and it's not going well, I think those are the conditions like that are ripe for burnout, because you're just putting so much into it and you're not getting much back. You're actually, the numbers are just being like, you're failing and you're trying so hard, and that's like a really hard thing to do for an extended amount of time. And so I just kind of like felt like I was starting to like lose my mojo, like my passion, my belief, my ability to really like sell to others, and yeah, it's not good. It's really hard to get to that spot, and it takes a while to like get it back, to sort of like heal that and get back to the other side. It is usually not I'm just gonna go for a vacation, for a 1 week vacation, and I'm not burnt out. If you let yourself really, if you keep flirting with that edge of burnout and you fall off the cliff of burnout, it is many times a sweaty climb back up the cliff to get to a healthy spot. And so yeah, it's I think some preventative care there before you have to go and get surgery or whatever is really helpful.
I really resonate with what you said about just losing that resistance and being more quick to kind of blow up in response to triggers. Mm-hmm. In my case, I like to use the analogy that I can usually handle 3 punches to the face per day, but if my limit goes down to 2 or 1 punches to the face, that's my wake-up call that, hey, I also need to be checking just where I'm at from a mental health standpoint and prioritizing myself.
100%.
Yep. Awesome, Santi. How's your empanada coming along?
It's good. It's good. Making some progress. It's like a kilo empanada.
Yeah, this is intense.
It's a whole meal.
Finally, Santi, what book are you reading right now that you'd recommend to our listeners?
I used to read like just tons of business and like books, and I don't as much anymore. Sometimes every once in a while. I'm reading The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And that's a great one. It's actually like a really helpful anti-burnout book. I think if we can like be truly present and not feeling, I did this in the past or worried about the future. I think one great metaphor that comes up super quick back on the other topic is optimizing what we can control and being really good at letting go what we can. Like a metaphor would be like plant the seed meticulously, water it, like nurture the soil, like do everything that you can. But at the end of the day, like the plant growing and getting a harvest is sort of like not up to you. All you can control are the conditions for it. Am I watering it and am I giving it the soil? But I feel like I white knuckled the harvest and like needed to make the outcome happen instead of just worrying about doing the right thing and letting the harvest kind of come. And I think what's hard about that is like what got you there won't get you there. Like what you hear won't get you there. Like it takes a ton of intentionality and care and a sense of like controlling the variables to like do that. But then as soon as you have watered it and fertilized it, digging it up more or like yelling at it to grow or just like, that's not going to make it. In fact, you're going to like mess it up more likely than you are to do that. And so as a founder, having the discernment of what is in my control now that I can act on that's helpful, and where do I just need to like trust that I've done what I can and let go of the rest, and now I need to sleep, now I need to go on a trip with my friends, I need to be with my partner, I need to do hot yoga or meditate, or just give my team another week, and when is it the time to, like, I think that's like the discernment that I feel like I have much more of it now than what I had resources wise able to during my entrepreneurial journeys in my 20s. So I'm reading the Power of Now, and then I love historical biographies of great people before going to bed because they're just interesting enough to keep my attention, but just boring enough to help me get to sleep. And so I'm in the first chapter of Theodore Rex, which is the Teddy Roosevelt's American president kind of biography, and really interesting dude. Did all the national parks and kind of started the conservation of nature, movement in the U.S. Back in the 1904, super early 1900s. Super interesting.
Amazing, Santi. Well, where can people find you online?
Sure, I'm on Twitter or X or whatever at Santiago Jara, Jara. I'm at withsanti.com for the CEO coaching thing, and then I'm working on a little CEO and executive coaching, and I'm working on a business AI education for executives and AI consulting for businesses at pragmatico.ai.
Pragmatico.ai. Amazing. Thank you so much, Santi. Salud.
Thank you, Joshua. Salud. Delicious.